stranger.
Greetings, folks, and welcome to the very special 100th episode of the Innsmouth Book Club podcast. We've got a very, very special show lined up for you this week. So that's why we've come here to the Gilman House Hotel. I'm one of your hosts, Tim Mendes.
And I'm the other one, Rob Hoyton. Now, as regular listeners will know, normally guests at the Gilman Hotel are housed in room 428, that special room. But our guest today has, such a standing in Innsmouth that he's actually got the whole top floor suite to himself. I refer, of course, to the marvellous Mr. Ramsey Campbell. Hey, Ramsey, how you doing?
Hey, guys, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming on today. And I know we had a chat before at the Innsmouth Literary Festival a couple of years back. You were our first guest of honour at our first event.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, you know, there's so many things we could ask, of course, but I wanted to start up to date because I read recently on your Facebook page, you've just finished the draft of a new novel, The Ancestral, is it?
Yes, another novel. Actually, it's dropped its first word, so it's now just Ancestral. So even easier to remember, guys.
Nice. Is that out? Is that going to be coming out with Flame Tree? Because you've been with them for a while now.
We don't know yet, because it's only the first draft, but we would hope so, and they've been extremely supportive, those guys. So I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yeah.
Certainly hope so.
They do some really lovely additions as well. Because I picked up because I was stuck in a room at a convention with Flame Tree Press. We were sort of right at the EasterCon a few years ago. We were right at the back, at the far end of the hotel in a back room, and I ended up buying a load of the hardback editions that they've done of like M.R. James and Lovecraftian and things like that.
Yes.
And you crop up in quite a lot of them, I've noticed.
Yes, you can't keep me away. That's absolutely right.
And can you give us any idea about the setting for Ancestral, or the rough outline of it?
Well, I mean, I don't really like to talk about stuff in progress, but in the broadest possible terms, it's located actually on the Wirral, which I haven't used very much, but I thought it was about time I did. And it makes particular use of the two ridges that basically frame the peninsula. There's Bidston on the one hand, and there's Thurstaston, which I used to call Thursaston, but to a horror of one of the editors at Virgin who used to live here. So he put me right on that. So that's on the other side, and between them is what. Well, not so much a ley line, there's something rather darker, which proves to have been the connection between two occultists at loggerheads, whose heritage haunts the present day story. So it's very much a supernatural horror tale, and I think it's got maybe a touch of the cosmic even, you never know. But we won't know till I've rewritten the wretched thing, and that won't be for months yet.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because I know you've said before Fritz Leiber was a great influence. I mean, think of like Smoke Ghost and Our Lady of Darkness and that kind of thing. How much does the environment inform your work? How much is it a part of the atmosphere?
Oh, hugely, yes. I mean, I think that's true of a lot of supernatural horror fiction as well. Not just me, but for me, yes, particularly so, and more often than not, local stuff. I mean, what I regard as my very first, story of mine, rather than some of its influences, was the very first story I set in Liverpool. There's a story called The Cellars, wrote back in 1965. Good Lord, how long is that? 60 years? Oh, my God, man and boy. There you go, you see. I'd already really been kind of, playing around with Liverpool settings, but placing them in my Severn Valley environments. But, the Britchester in cold print is Liverpool in all but name, really. I think it was about time I owned up. And in the case of The Cellars, it wasn't merely based on a setting. It was actually inspired by a setting in Liverpool city centre, long gone now, I'm afraid. It was a series of sub-cellars and sub-cellars that you could get into. They were just open to the public. They'd been abandoned for years. I have no idea what they were used for. But they went on a long way. If you got a flashlight, you could spend an afternoon in there. And basically that's, I thought, well, a friend of mine used to run a bookshop nearby, John Rolls, sadly long gone. He was murdered, actually. But he found his way in there and said, I said, said to me, I'm sure you would like this. And indeed I did. And as soon as I'd gone down there, I think I knew that this has got to be a story. And I duly wrote that story, which is The Cellars. And, as well as everything else, it's kind of a snapshot of the Liverpool city centre as it was 60 years ago, as well as just this particular setting. I've used a lot of Merseyside in stories. Creatures of the Pool is probably my ultimate Liverpool novel because it draws very much on traditions and obscure bits of history of the city. The stranger the better, and the more obscure the better. The only thing with that was that it was about at least a decade in the research. Obviously, I was doing other stuff as well. But I wanted to, to do the best book I could, using as much of Liverpool's history as I could. And so whenever I went into a second-hand bookshop, I'd look for stuff, the rarer the better, and bought it all up. So I've now got a pretty good library of obscure books about Liverpool, actually. Some of them dating from the mid-19th century and talking about 50 years before that. Some of which, as far as I know, have never been reprinted. But the thing is, because I did the research over such a long period, once I found something in one of these books, I'd put it down in my notebooks, and sometimes I'd transcribe it, sometimes I'd paraphrase it, and sometimes I'd spin off from it. But the thing about this, because it took such a long time, I no longer know exactly which bits I made up, which bits I didn't. So, it has become a legend in its own right. And how could I not like that? So actually, it's an ambition achieved, really. But I suppose in a way also, the Daeloth trilogy, the Britchester mythos trilogy, as I also like to call it. That's very much about Liverpool as it was in the 50s, and then coming into the 80s and eventually into something like the present day. And without Liverpool, it wouldn't be half the book it is, I think.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to actually bring up, because it was like when I was growing up in Cheshire and things like that, I actually spent quite a lot of time in the Wirral because my godfather was a vicar in a church over there.
Right.
So I ended up spending quite a lot of my youth in the Wirral randomly. But so it always came across as very authentic to me. Mm-hmm. And it was like I was reading earlier the introduction you did for Alone with the Horrors, which version was it? The Tor reprint of it.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And you were talking about a lot of the influences, and it became clear then, because a lot of it was inspired by real places, real events, like Macintosh Willie.
Yes. Oh, yes. Very much so. That was pure. Yeah, that was just. Well, I think you. I'll tell the anecdote if you like. I know you know it obviously, but yeah, this was when we were our first house in Liverpool, which is in Tuebrook, a suburb of Liverpool. And there's a Newsham Park, which is just across the road, well, almost just across the road from where we lived, so from the street where we lived. And I just often used to go walking in there, and there was indeed a park shelter. I was passing by one day, and I read this name on the back wall, which, Macintosh Willie. And I took a second look, and what it actually said was Mac Tosh Willie. Obviously, three guys' names, But I misread it in this fashion. But it was that was that, and it was also that they recently had constructed a cement surround around the fishing pond, and because it was obviously somebody had gone and walked through it, so you got footsteps or footprints, I beg your pardon, embedded in the concrete, just very near this shelter. And those two things came together to make the story. And often enough, that's how it is. Don't bug up the joint, by the way. I'm teasing.
I suppose in this country we're lucky in that sense. And I'm from London, and you peel back these layers of history, right? The modern day feels very superficial, and you can go all the way back to pre-Roman. Very easily, you can't throw a stone without hitting something.
Oh gosh, yes.
Even out here, I live in the country now. There's so many things around. Elizabethan, whatever, medieval. I suppose then is that a major source of ideas, or does it just work in different ways? Do you see something like that and you get an idea, or do you have an idea and then you think, oh, I can fit that into that location?
Oh, a bit of both, really, but often enough, it's the location that gives me the idea. I mean, well, another great example here on the Wirral is Parkgate, which is it was a fishing village, on the Wirral coast, facing across to Wales. But these days, it's just a sea of grass. It's all completely silted up. And miles and miles of grass. And as soon as I went there, the first time I visited, I thought, there's got to be a story in this. But it took me a long, long time to come up with, an idea that would do it justice. And then eventually, one day, I thought, well, how about seeing a ship coming along through the grass, in the moonlight, and hence the story, the ferries. But generally speaking, it will be the location that's the seed of the story. More often than not, sure.
Yeah, something else I got from reading that introduction was that it's not just the locations that tend to be inspired by real places. It's also some of the people, some of the characters.
Yeah,
and I was reading with much amusement that Cold Print was inspired by somebody you knew.
Well, two people, actually. A bit of a conglomerate, yeah. On the one hand, when I was working in the civil service, first office job I took, the only office job, actually, when I was 16, partly because August Derleth, had already bought my first story, the Church in High Street. And, he then discovered my age, which took him aback. And he said basically, well, don't rely on writing to make a living, even though he had. And he said, I don't recommend this. Get yourself a steady job that's not too demanding, and then you can use your spare time to write. And that's indeed what I did. But the point was that while I was working in the civil service, there was indeed this guy in the office who discovered that I was importing what were then banned books like Naked Lunch, and
wow.
William Burroughs' early novels and stuff of that nature, Henry Miller, and he found me reading one, I think, in the office at some point. He would often come up and say, "You've got any more exciting books?" He would say with a glint in his eye. But then I think that's in the story as well. I think I did lend him Jean Genet's Notre Dame des Fleurs, Our Lady of the Flowers, it's a gay novel, which, because the gay content was then banned. It's very literary. And I think he thought, that's not, that's too literary for me. I want the spicy stuff, basically. So he was a bit of the character. And the other one was basically a sort of a conglomerate, I suppose, of a couple of gym masters at my old grammar school. Both of them seem to have a certain proclivity, should we say, that Sam Strutt shares. Sorry, silenced you. Sorry, carry on.
No. I'm just processing. Because I was a grammar school boy as well, so I just had a little flashback.
Flashbacks, yeah.
It was a maths teacher with us who used to come into the changing rooms.
Yeah. There's always one. Yeah.
Chemistry teacher for us. He used to rub himself on the edge of the desk. It was very unsettling.
God, I hope he didn't do anything with the pipettes, that's all.
One of the sixth formers did rub the board rubber, the chalk on the corner.
Right.
So, yeah, he became known from then on as Chalky Balls.
Something I was looking at today, I found out that I didn't actually know that you'd done some sword and sorcery stories as well.
Oh, yes.
With a character, Raya. Is that right pronunciation?
Yes.
And I was also pleased to find out that the Far Away and Never collection is available up on Amazon now.
It is.
So I've just put that in my basket. Yeah, that was something I wasn't aware of. Was that quite early on?
Oh, very, yes. I mean, this would have been back, let me think. I believe I might say it was in 74, actually. I think 74. Because Kirby McCauley, by then, sadly, great friend and agent, now long gone, he was by then my agent, that of a lot of people actually in the field. And he was saying, well, horror isn't doing much at the moment. Of course, a couple of years later, it would. Thank heaven, or you wouldn't be talking to me now. But he was saying, you've got to diversify, basically. So I had to go to a bit of science fiction, which really was not very good at all. And almost none of those stories sold. I mean, they eventually put them into a collection called Inconsequential Tales, along with some other, minor stuff. But I got this idea. I thought, well, how about trying a bit of sword and sorcery? And I did a couple of separate stories first of all, and then I got this idea for the first of those stories, The Sustenance of Hoak, which it introduces old Raya the swordsman and his friend who gets done into the story, after which he's a loner, basically. And that's sold to Andrew J. Offert, about whom recently, I have to say, I read an extraordinary book by his son called My Father the Pornographer, which is about, the son discovered that old Andy used to write, oodles of porn, basically, which, of course, a lot of people did. So did, Robert Silverberg, Jose Farmer, various other people.
Stephen King didn't he?
I don't think Steve ever.
I thought he sold some stuff to Playboy in his youth.
Oh, we sold some stuff to Playboy, but that was horror.
Oh, it was? Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Or Knave or Rogue, one of those anyway. But no, all that was horror. Well, Dennis Etchison did the same, with the same market. But they did have quite high literary standards for horror fiction. So, they won the good markets back in those days. And indeed, Playboy certainly was, had a very high literary standard. Obviously, Graham Greene and Nabokov and folk like that. But I'm sort of getting off the point here, aren't I? Basically, Andy Offert, right? Andy Offert bought this story of mine, the first of Raya, and I believe I'm right in saying it was about 16,000 words. And he said, I'd like to buy this story, but it's a bit long. Can you cut it down a bit? So I took 4,000 words out, to his astonishment, which I thought was just about right, and improved it considerably. As he pointed out in introducing it, I took out as much as the length of some of the other stories in the book, but that's how to do it, I think, get ruthless. And then I wrote, so he liked that, and then he got a commission to do a second volume, asked me to do another story. And so it went on for 4 volumes, after which, sadly, Raya sort of hung up his sword, except he didn't quite, because just last year I wrote a new story about him. Which I think is probably going to be the final Raya story, because now he's he's getting on quite a bit, and he wants to find some meaning in his life. And this is called, dear me, I can't remember my own titles now. It is, I think, called The Sign of Deoloth, and it's going to be in a new collection, a new anthology, I beg your pardon, of stories using the Lovecraft mythos, but in unusual situations. So, and that's out, probably this spring, I believe.
Brilliant.
And you're going to ask the title of the anthology, and by gum, I've forgotten. So you can see senility developing before your eyes.
It's the cold weather. That's what it is. It hampers the,
hampers
the brain function. Yeah.
Not only the testicle drop off your eyes.
They dropped off years ago. And I noticed you mentioned, because we watched the Solomon Kane film the other night again for the first time in a while, and I'd forgotten, of course, you wrote the novelisation of that. And then, of course, you had was it the Bantam collections, I think?
I did. That was, again, way back in the 70s, yes. Again, a deal Kirby got me. Well, actually, it was, let me think, it was Don Grant, I think, in those days, who controlled the Howard estate. And there were these unfinished Solomon Kane fragments, and he wanted somebody to finish them. And Kirby, I think partly because I was English, and and Noel Solomon Kane was also English, he thought of me as being a possible. And that I did indeed do it, and those are, I think, still out there. Actually, I don't think they're in print right now, but you can find them easily enough, I think.
I noticed you mentioned Carl Edward Wagner as well in the introduction, so that's another influence.
Oh, I think so. Yes. I mean, Carl certainly, Howard, obviously, Fritz, I think. But yes, I mean, Carl was a wonderful writer. I mean, he didn't like to, he repudiated the term sword and sorcery, even though Fritz had invented it. But, Carl thought he was writing more sort of, Gothic fiction, very much in the sort of Melmoth the Wanderer area, which I'd say you can certainly see that, but the remarkable stories, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Solomon Kane novelization, because you did novelizations of Universal horror films, I believe.
Yes, three of them. Now this was Carl Dreadstone. That's the guy. Was the house name? I mean, again, you see, let me reminisce some more. It was Piers Dudgeon, my first British editor. Great guy. Now doing sort of oral histories of various places. He did one for Liverpool, actually, interviewing various locals, including me, actually, to give a sort of sense of the place. But back then, he was the managing editor at Star Books, which is the paperback arm of W.H. Allen. And I met him and Hugh Lamb, actually, the anthropologist, sadly another guy who's gone. One summer, I think, in back in 75, that would have been. And Hugh had recommended me as somebody that Piers should look to reprint. So he brought out Demons by Daylight, with a great Les Edwards cover, as I later was to discover. Now Piers then, quite soon after that, got the deal to do these Universal horror film novelizations. He initially wanted me to do all 6, but one, there were 2 werewolf novels, and I thought one's got to be enough, for me. And there was also The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And since I can't swim, I didn't think I was going to be the man for that. Now, had I known about David Shaw, I would certainly recommend him, but I don't think Dave was around to that extent back then. So, he's now the great Creature of the Black Lagoon expert and enthusiast, of course. So anyway, I got to do 3 of those books, which were The Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula's Daughter, and The Wolfman. And Walter Harris did, let me think, he did he did Black Lagoon and The Werewolf of London, and nobody knows who did The Mummy. It's a lost to posterity, I'm afraid. Even Piers can't remember, and the contracts are all gone in a clear out. So we'll never know. Wow. I would just say this. It wasn't originally going to be Carl Thunstone, I suggested. But then I thought, I better ask Manly Wellman, who created, John Thunstone. And Manly, quite understandably, said, well, people might think it's me. And obviously that wasn't really necessarily going to play. So we came up with old Dreadstone instead. And I will say one other thing, one other terrible anecdote about Burroughs Piers Dudgeon, which is not against him at all, it's against me. Because one time in the great days of publishers' lunches, as you know, which involved a great many bottles as well as occasionally putting food in your mouth, he I think before we left his office, he showed me a couple of stills from a film in production. He said, Ramsey, that this is around, for offers. What do you think? And I, a couple of guys in spacesuits and the like. And I said, well, maybe good, but make an offer. Don't go too high. And so he got outbid, and I should imagine he's never forgiven me. Star Wars.
Oh, the big one, the one that got away.
Yeah.
When you're doing something from like the film novelization like that, how much leeway do you have? I guess there's not a lot of wiggle room, is there, or can you bring your own elements into it?
Well, to be honest, I don't want there to be. I mean, in fact, it was more the other Dreadstone books that, depart quite a lot from the films. I really wanted to stay as close as I could and as close to the scripts as I could as well, and with the Solomon Kane, So back in those days, of course, again, we're talking about the mid-70s, there obviously was no home video. So there was, these days, if I were to do such a thing, I would try and consult the film, as I wrote, have it up on the computer maybe, to what, to start and stop, or on the television, wherever. But just to be able to consult the film. Whereas in those cases, in each case, they took me down to London, and they showed me the film in a viewing suite, and I actually had a copy of a Xerox of the original shooting scripts. I was kind of scribbling away in the dark as best I could, trying to note down details that I wanted to preserve, because I wasn't going to be able to see the films again. So well, I wasn't, as it transpired. The one thing I did try and do it again with Solomon Kane as well, was that if there were things in the script that they would have liked to have filmed, but in the case of Solomon Kane, they didn't have the time or possibly the budget. But I saw several different drafts of that script, and so I incorporated a couple of scenes that I think he would have liked to have had in, but just couldn't get round to doing. And in the case of the Wolfman, I think crucially for me, in the script, Kurt Siodmak actually puts in capital letters that the Wolfman should only ever be seen from his own viewpoint, as a reflection, in water or in mirrors. So we're never absolutely sure if has he transformed, or is it merely a mental condition? Now, obviously, Universal were going to have that. They want an old Lon Chaney Jr. with yak hair, so that's what we get. It's effective enough in its way. So of course, he doesn't look anything like a wolf, which is what John Landis fixed, in American Werewolf. But all the same, that was something I tried to put into the novel, and I was pleased to do that.
That's a very nice twist, because then that really plays into that weird fiction, unreliable narrator sort of trope, doesn't it? Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah.
Very much so. Oh, yeah.
So the flip side of that, you've done novelizations of films, because you're quite into cinema, I believe.
Oh, very much so. And of course, may I now do a bit of advertising on my own behalf. The third printing of my book about the Three Stooges.
Oh, nice.
Soon be out. And I've got to tell you, it's expanded. The stuff I didn't know when it first came out that I found out later on. And actually, even a couple of shorts that turned up on the internet that were not available, so far as I could find, when the book was originally written. So it's there's some old stuff in there.
Brilliant.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so you've had 3 adaptations, I believe, of four, actually, if you count the TV one, which we'll get to in a moment.
Yeah.
But in Spain, you had The Nameless, Second Name, and The Influence.
Yeah, I mean, Second Name is actually Pact of the Fathers, but yeah.
So how did that come about, and what were your thoughts about it? How do you think they did it?
Oh, pretty well, but I mean, it was purely, an approach via my agent, from the film company, Filmax. In fact, or they made, they were involved in all 3, in fact.
Right.
Well, the most recent one, The Influence, was made for Netflix, but the other 2 were theatrically distributed. But yeah, no. I mean, I've always, and I've often said this. I'd much rather have a good film in its own right than a kind of dull, faithful, illustration of the book. We've got the book, now let's have the film, and if they, that's their film, it's not mine, and I don't actually have any input, but I don't necessarily want to have any input. I'd rather, they took it their own way. And I mean, in the case of The Nameless, Lost in Nombre, Jaume Balaguero, he's very radical, really. He threw out all the supernatural elements, but he said what he wanted to do was to convey, the dread that he found in the book. And I certainly think he does that for sure. And I think it's very much in the spirit of the book. And apparently, the finale was filmed in a real abandoned motel outside Barcelona. And they filmed there for about a week, I believe. And apparently they found it pretty unnerving to stay there, for that week. So, I think that comes across in the film. And my understanding is he's now developing The Nameless as a television series. So I look forward to seeing that too. In fact, yes, I know it's cast, so it's in production now, I do believe.
Yeah, I was reading about that this morning, because I thought that was very effective, because I saw The Nameless and The Influence a while ago. I haven't actually got round to watching the other one yet.
That's rarer, I think. Yes.
Yeah, because they pop up on Netflix, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that one floating around anywhere.
Oh, no.
But Yeah, I thought they did a really good job on it.
Yeah.
And so for that kind of cinema, I mean, because obviously it's not massive budget studios and all that kind of thing. Do you think that these smaller people, if they have a vision, can do a better justice than people just throwing money at things and hoping for the best?
Well, it seems quite possible, doesn't it? I mean, I think, as well as those folks, I think of the likes of Mario Bava. I mean, look at what he was doing, for heaven's sake. Look at The Mask of Satan, or Blood and Black Lace. A tiny budget, the tracking shots are managed by putting the camera on a trolley and running it along, apparently in Blood and Black Lace. And so forth. And, if you got a genius at work on a low budget, then you can, I think, get something quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think another prime example of that, I mean, we lost him recently, David Lynch.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yes.
We covered Eraserhead just a few episodes ago. And I know you wrote about him. Was it in the Cinema Macabre?
I did.
People often say Lovecraft is unfilmable. Would Eraserhead be unnovelizationable, if that's all?
That's a good question. Very possibly, I should think. Yeah, I wouldn't bother the man to attempt it, I tell you that. Although I did have, the dream of David Lynch's Kneading Ghosts, but that's never going to happen, sadly. I don't imagine it ever would have anyway.
Yeah, so I very briefly alluded to, there was another adaptation in a sort of, I think it's a bit forgotten now, but it was sort of 1998 to 2000. It was a British TV series called The Hunger.
I think Canadian, wasn't it? Yes,
was it Canadian?
Yeah.
But all I really know about it, I've never seen it or been able to find it. So if you dear listeners know where I can get hold of it, please let me know. But it was all sort of spicy horror stories, wasn't it? And it was
right.
And it was hosted by David Bowie, I believe.
It was indeed. So I got a story introduced by David Bowie, which, by God,
that's cool.
Something. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. So it was your story, The Seductress.
It was.
Yeah, and that came from the collection Scared Stiff, Tales of Sex and Death.
Yes.
How did you, because I've recently tried my hand at a little bit of erotic horror, and it's a lot more difficult than you would think.
It is. Yes, I think that's right. Well, you see, what happened was this. Yet another, I mean, Lord, we keep referring to those long gone, how sad is that? But Michel Parry, another old friend. I mean, we were in correspondence when we were both at school before he then became an anthologist and novelist and so forth. But he'd done a variety of anthologies in the 70s, to which I'd contributed to some of them anyway, and then he started doing the Mayflower books of black magic stories, and he got one of mine for the first volume where it was Potential, a story called Potential, and then a couple of volumes in he said, in a letter to me, he said, it's the only thing that he was kind of missing was that nobody was sending him stories about sort of sex magic, and so I thought, well, hello, there's a challenge then. What we can do. And so I duly wrote a story called Dolls. And part of what I was trying to do was to discover, as you say, it's more difficult than you might think to balance horror and the erotic. Does one kind of wipe out the other or undermine the other? So that's one of the things I was trying to find out. But I think it worked. Anyway, I wrote the story, Dolls, sent it to Michel. He duly put it in the anthology and was disconcerted to find that the publishers thought they better send this to their lawyers in case it got done for obscenity. There you go, which they didn't. Well, the lawyers said, no, we don't think you'll have a problem, and indeed they never did. Although, curiously enough, what did happen, and again, I was involved in this, but Lord, I can't remember which story it was of mine now, but there was Michel did 2 anthologies as Linda Lovecraft, called The Devil's Kisses, and more Devil's Kisses. And the second one apparently was seized. I think it was seized, or W.H. Smith refused to stock it, which meant basically you were wiped out in those days in Britain. They were the big, the big distributors, the big bookstore distributors. And it was actually not my story, which I could have been proud of, but it wasn't. It was a story Oh Lord, from National Lampoon. I can't now remember who the author was. It was a pretty extreme thing. Obviously meant as parody, set at the children's party, which involved a donkey, and I won't go on. I shall leave this to your imagination. So that was the end of the Devil's Kisses, I'm afraid.
Something else I noticed about that series, The Hunger, was they also adapted Carl Edward Wagner's River of Night's Dreaming. I need to see that.
Well, I never did see that. I mean, they did a Robert Aikman story, actually.
Did they?
I can't remember which one they did. Right. I'm sorry, it's gone for the moment. But yeah, it was quite a distinguished series, what it was picking up.
Yeah, I need to try and track that down. It sounds great.
Yeah. Well, let's hope somebody will, put it on disc and release it,
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about social media because I know it's something you're very active on.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I know where this is going. Yeah, your mate Stephen King the other day, yeah.
Well, yes, my old friend Stephen King there.
That was, yeah. I mean, that was almost a novella in itself.
It was. We should explain to people just so they don't get the wrong impression that I was approached supposedly as for Facebook friendship by Stephen King, although he spelled himself with a V, V-E-N, King. But on the other hand, it was old Steve King's portrait that was his icon, and he was a best-selling writer with thousands of readers, which would disconcert Steve, I think, a little bit, because that's all he's got these days, which I doubt. I kind of doubt that somehow. And we had a long conversation that I've posted on Facebook. I think that's what you were thinking of.
That's it. But there's been many others as well, because I guess we all get these odd friend requests, and but you strike me as being someone who's very open and engages very well with your readers and your fan group, if I can put it like that.
Sure.
But is that a two-sided thing, no? Or with these things, you sort of laugh them off, I guess?
Oh, those, yes, I think so. And I've not yet met Annie Wilkes with or my equivalent thereof. So with luck, I won't get me feet chopped off or anything like that. Not just yet, anyway. But no. I mean, no. It's I like meeting and talking to folk who like my stuff, and I mean, if I could trail this, I'll be doing a lot of that down in Brighton for the World Fantasy Convention. I'm certainly going to be there. So, if you folk can make it, see you there.
Well, I live down the road, so I'll be there.
You'll be there.
Has that changed the nature of fandom, do you think, a lot, social media? I mean, obviously, you're someone who's always done a lot of conventions and that kind of stuff. But has it changed it? And has it changed the world of publishing, do you think, in many ways as well?
I suppose it's certainly an additional kind of, mechanism for, publicising your stuff. And I suppose to some extent these days it seems as actually a requirement. You need to be out there. But fun to do. Why not? I mean, just like we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was also interested to know alongside that, I don't know, every writer gets asked this, I know, like, what's your process, But is that something that has changed over the years, or do you approach your writing the same way as before?
Well, I mean, the actual sort of generation of it is pretty well the same as it's always been. The idea comes from wherever it does come from, and as we said, obviously the landscape can certainly be something. It can be anything whatsoever. It could be some sort of passing detail that could set up a short story, set up a novel. I mean, my I suppose my favourite one is still the 2 lines of dialogue from, I think it's Rocky 3, actually, the Sylvester Stallone movie that led to an entire novel for me. So thank you, Sylvester. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant.
But in terms of the later process, I mean, I think the one thing has happened is, I mean, there was a time when I'd in the rewriting, I'd try and salvage as much as I possibly could of the first draft. justify as much of that to myself as I could. These days, I try and jettison as much of the first draft as I possibly can, and improve every damn thing that I can possibly do. And so everything's up for grabs and has to justify itself. And I've certainly become a lot more ruthless in terms of the rewriting. And I hope, to its improvement, to its benefit.
You were saying earlier about like 10 years research and things like that on things like fellstones and things like this. How much research went into all that? Because there's a hell of a lot of musical terminology and
that. To be honest, that was just a lifetime's love of music. It wasn't any research involved. It was more just me putting in by little observations that I developed here and there over decades of doing it, like half a century of doing it, however long it's been. So there wasn't really much in that. Something like, I don't know, The Hungry Moon, that took more research, like driving up to the Peak District and reading up on well dressing and things of that nature. And also, once Harry Mooney, made himself felt, I went looking for existing legends and traditions that could prove his existence. I was kind of disconcerted by how much I found, which I suppose just proves how conspiracy theories come about. You can find evidence for anything. And indeed, if I may return briefly to the Three Stooges, I've proved, to I hope everybody's satisfaction, at considerable length, that Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is a tribute to the Three Stooges.
Oh, explain. That's brilliant.
Well, I don't know if you know the film Room 237.
Yes.
Where people make a great deal of evidence that it's really Kubrick's admission that he staged the moon landing, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, for me, no, it's that he intended a huge tribute to the Three Stooges. Well, listen, remember the staircase scene, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Wendy, give me the bat.
Yeah.
Give me the bat. That's Mo, give me the bat. Give me that boing. Yeah, well, there you are. And the more I looked in the film, the more I saw. But you must read the book for yourself.
Was that something that you grew up with, the Three Stooges? I think for me it was Laurel and Hardy. They were always on TV or something.
It was Laurel and Hardy for me too, really, and Keaton and Chaplin. No, the whole thing about the Three Stooges and that book of mine, it's really partly a chronicle of my getting to find the Stooges more and more interesting. And the more I looked, the more I saw. Again, I first encountered them when Channel 4 started back in the 80s. And a friend of mine, he said he preferred the Three Stooges to Laurel and Hardy, which I don't and never shall. But, I've come to like the Stooges quite a lot at their best. But the thing was, he thought the Stooges were less predictable and faster. Well, yeah. Well, the point about Laurel and Hardy is you could see the gag coming. That's the pleasure, But also, as I think as David Thompson points out, you also see the variation, the thing you don't expect in terms of what you did expect with Laurel and Hardy often enough.
Yeah.
But thing was, Channel 4, which, in its day was a genuine alternative channel and tried to do stuff that nobody else was doing on British television. So they ran a lot of the Three Stooges two-reelers, the shorts from 30s and 40s, and they would be on in the afternoon. So I remember looking at them and thinking, well, I'm not laughing, but I thought something brought me back to them. When I knew it's going to be on, often enough I'd go and see a press show of a film in the morning because I was reviewing films for the BBC locally. But I'd try and get home and watch, if I could, watch the Stooges. I still didn't really get this, but I kept coming back. Then came the end of that, and so I just lost sight of them for decades. And then Sony in America started this project, but obviously some lover of the Stooges, because they're very well done. A complete sequential, chronological series of box sets of all the Stooges shorts. Starting the very first one for Columbia. And I thought, well, I'll have another look. So I bought them. I had another look at them, and I thought, well, there's a bit more here than I thought. And it was eventually that it was actually PS Publishing's film book arm, Electric Dream House. Neil Snowden is the guy who runs that, and they came to me and said, would I like to do a monograph on a horror film or a science fiction or whatever. Now, Night of the Demon is my all-time favorite horror movie, but I think somebody had already done that. In any case, even with that great favorite of mine, or something like Lost Highway, I couldn't see getting 20,000 words out of it somehow,
Yeah.
So, but eventually I thought, well, what about I had the Three Stooges meet Snow White, which is, it's technically a fantasy, and it's one of the one of the very few big budget films made by Walter Lang, who directed The King and I. So, it's a prestigious sort of a project. So, but I still thought, no, I can't do a whole book about this. Supposing I do about Three Stooges. And they were a little taken aback by this proposal to begin with, and eventually say, go ahead. And so I initially thought of doing that film with a lot of background. But the more I looked at their films, the more I thought, no, I want to talk about all the films. And this I duly did. And, as I said, it's Bridget Fonda who says, if you think you don't like the Three Stooges, you've never really looked, or words to that effect.
Right.
And I found, I began to think, well, this is true. And it's not all knockabout. There is a lot more going on. There's a lot more verbal humour, and there's a lot more, kind of slapstick rather than just straightforward knockabout. And, from being sort of weirdly fascinated with them, I can now just watch the best of them for enjoyment. So that's what happened, and that's what this book is all about.
They do have one scene that gets replayed a lot in our house. One of those things you do, was it take your hat off, put your hand on the Bible, raise your right hand?
Oh, yes, that's a great scene. And I now I analyse that in the book because it's directed by Jules White, who was their main director, though not their favourite director. He made the most of those two reels. He also made a lot of other two reels for hugely prolific for Columbia. And one he made in the early 30s was with Buster Keaton. In fact, I beg your pardon. Now, wait a minute. Am I getting this mixed up? No, it wasn't. No, I'm sorry. I don't know whether. Yes, White directed the film, I think. And certainly Clyde Brookman, who worked with Keaton a lot in the silent era, wrote a lot of the Stooges shorts as well. And Buster does that scene. He's the first guy to do that routine, in fact, the courtroom thing. But I actually think, admittedly, Buster was, he was a bit on the downslide by then, having become alcoholic and so forth, and having lost control over, the films he was making. But I actually think that Curly's scene is slightly better. I think his timing is slightly better. And I think he does the verbal thing better as well. And there's, his extra little bits of invention. And that's a great scene. And that whole film, Disorder in the Court, is actually one I recommend in the introduction. People who want to have a look at the Stooges and see if there's more than they thought, that's one I certainly think you should try out.
Yeah. So we've talked about sex and horror, but then it strikes me humour and horror. There's that, there's some very good examples. I always like Peter Jackson's Bad Taste and that kind of stuff.
Oh gosh, yes, very much so. Yeah.
But again, I imagine that's equally as challenging to get that balance right, I would think.
Yeah, it is.
Well, yeah, for me, it comes just naturally out of it. It's not something I try to impose on the story. It's more that, sometimes you sort of see the comic possibilities and run with them. Well, actually, I can sort of tell you pretty well exactly where this started. I've been doing little bits of, wry humour perhaps in some of my early stuff. But it was Kneading Ghosts, that novella of mine. And I'd just finished Midnight Sun, writing Midnight Sun, which was an absolute bastard to write the first draft. It really was. I think it was probably because I was trying to eschew any kind of physical horror. And, it was a very conscious ambition. Now, actually, I think it's not too bad a book looking at it now. At the time, I just thought it was a failure, but I think now it's a qualified success. Anyway, the point was, Deborah Beale, over at Legend Books, she was commissioning novellas. He wanted me to do one. And I eventually thought, well, I only want to do a novella if there's a reason for it to be a novella, not a long short story, not a novel that's been chopped down. And eventually I had this idea, well, maybe suppose it takes place over the course of a single day, or, before dawn to, after dark, something like that. And that began to work. And I had got the germ of an idea that became that book. But I'd only written, probably a couple of days' worth. We got him across the river off the island onto the mainland, and we got him to the bus terminal, and we got to the destination boards on the buses, and as I wrote them, I thought, well, this is a lot weirder than I was planning on. What do I do with this? I thought, well, let's follow. And the further I went, the more bizarrely comic it became in some ways. And I mean, I've never been able to do this before or since. I was actually getting up, coming here to my desk where I'm talking to you from now, every morning, to try and find out what happened next. And just scribbling away there as fast as it came. I could hardly keep up. And it's, as I say, it's like dreaming. It was like sort of dreaming onto the page, quite literally. And, it's never happened like that again. But the next book I wrote was The Count of 11, which initially I thought was basically be a novel about a very ordinary guy who gradually loses it and becomes a serial killer. But again, very early on in that book, I thought, hang on, this is funny. What am I going to do about that? And again, I thought, well, follow it, see where it goes. And it turned in, well, there was funniness. There was a great review somewhere, I think it was a Telegraph, that said if Stan Laurel had been a serial killer, this might have been the story. Well, there's no higher praise than that.
That's great. I had something similar because I started writing things and it was supposed to be serious and all the rest of it, but I was basically raised on carry-on films. So it always sneaks in. There's always double entendre and the odd nudge and a wink in there, right? Yeah. And somebody, and I still to this day don't know whether it was a criticism or praise, because I think it may have been a negative, but I'm not sure. Somebody described the story, this one in particular, as the demented love child of H.P. Lovecraft and P.G. Wodehouse. And I was like, you know what? I'm keeping that. I'm putting that in my bio.
Absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
Just perfect. Yeah. Do you think there has to be an element of humour in horror, or does it become if it's unrelentingly grim constantly?
I don't think you have to. I mean, after all, no less than Lovecraft used to say, that that comedy was inimical to horror. Although, there's the occasional moment that I do wonder, yeah. The Dutchman's breeches have become a thing of sinister menace. I think puts it on the parallel of mind you, if you've been to Amsterdam and been to a coffee shop, that might very well happen.
That's very true. But yeah, in the letters between, we're drawing on the letters between Lovecraft and Smith a lot for Strange Shadows. And there's huge amounts of humour in there. The names they make up for each other, everything.
Oh, there's that side of Lovecraft, certainly. But, I think there was more for his friends. Well, I mean, the other guy, there probably are many, but one other person, who was hugely funny in person was Dennis Etchison. But he clearly, took all that out of his fiction, or took it out. He kept it out, is what I mean. His stories are very, very bleak. Although, having said that, he used to say to me, and probably to others too, he wished people laughed more because he thought there was some comedy in the stories. It's obviously very deadpan. I mean, Buster Keaton had nothing on Dennis.
I suppose there's always an element of gallows humour as well that you see in certain professions as a coping mechanism.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a very interesting, I forget which of the books of letters this is in, but there's a very interesting analysis by Lovecraft of Thornley Abbey, that, the Percival Landon story, if you know it. And he says in that, in his analysis, that it's basically a comic story, but the tone of it isn't. And it's the tone and the, the selection of detail that makes it into a horror story. And, it kind of blanks out the comedy, if you like, because it becomes so, a genuinely frightening story as far as I'm concerned.
Another one I always found was M.R. James, there were certain lines in terms of phrasing it that I always found really funny, like the bit in the mezzo tint, he's talking about golfers talking of golfing things and all this kind of.
Oh yes, oh yeah. Oh, there's certainly a bit of wry humour in old James. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I believe you, like, I guess you'd call it juvenilia. I believe you wrote a collection of ghostly tales.
I did when I was 11, going on for 12. Yeah. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, and these were later released in Crypt of Cthulhu or something.
Well, they escaped. I don't know if they released.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was wondering where you could get hold of them because I'd like to read those.
Sadly, I think only if you find a second-hand copy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we could reprint. There is only one in this limited edition of The Inhabitants of the Lake that PS are currently in production for, but I think that sold out before publication, I'm afraid.
Right.
But yeah, well, perhaps we should put that in a book somewhere. Maybe we should. Time to reprint them and let the world crawl or quail or whatever it might do.
Yeah, because I've read your Jamesian story that you did. It's included in the Flame Tree hardback of the complete M.R. James, a story called The Guide.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was very close to what he was doing, but it had your kind of slant on it. And yeah, I'm interested to read more of that kind of thing.
That's what I hope to do. Yeah, right.
I think horror shows no sign of going away, does it, or weird fiction? And I think Lovecraftian in particular just seems to keep growing and getting more and more bloated and bloated.
Yes. But, yes, Cthulhu is feeding. That's what.
Yes, indeed.
I wonder what that speaks to about humanity, really. But also, I think it's impossible to keep up with it in terms of looking at everything that's coming out. But has been anything in particular that's caught your eye? I'm thinking especially in terms of film adaptations or TV, that sort of thing.
Not of late, I don't think. I mean, I often outrage people, or in some cases persuade people. I still think that the greatest Lovecraftian film is the Blair Witch Project, as being, in terms of what Lovecraft's ambitions were, that the sort of documentary quality. Even the title has got that sort of feel of, facts in the case of Arthur German, or, that sort of thing, facts in the case of Monsieur Voldemar or whatever. It's got that documentary sound to it. But also, the fact that nothing is shown directly. I mean, the most horrific thing you see in the film is one tooth, a bloody tooth. That's what you get. But for me, at least, there's a real sense of, uncanny menace throughout the film. And it's all done by illusion. And that, I think, is crucially the Lovecraftian approach. So I still hold out for that one. But I'm still hoping, old Guillermo del Toro gets to do his Mountains of Madness. Well, maybe, who knows? Maybe will it happen? Will it ever happen? We can only hope.
Yeah. And I think, is there a Dunwich Horror on the cards with Stanley, the Colour Out of Space guy? I'm not sure.
Oh, yes. I mean, he was going to make it, and then it fell through, and now it's perhaps back up again. Let's hope so, because he certainly got something of a feel for it.
I believe James Wan is doing Call of Cthulhu.
Is he?
As well.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I believe so. I read an article a while ago because, he did Swamp Thing and things like that. He really wanted to go more in that direction.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I'd love to do Call of Cthulhu. And then I heard that apparently he was doing it. So,
well, I'd certainly be there for it if it happens, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying about that Blair Witch Project, because I thought that's incredibly Lovecraftian, specific, but actually more cosmic than specifically Lovecraftian. There's elements of the Willows in there for me, yes. and Carl Edward Wagner's Sticks, very much so in the the stick men and all that kind of stuff. It reminded me a lot of that.
Very much so, yeah.
So we have a couple of questions from our patrons, which perhaps we'll finish with those. Let's just see what we got here. A.T. Johnson writes, first, thank you, Ramsey, for the many wonderful tales over the years. And as to questions, if it's not too personal, what are your beliefs or best guesses about the nature of our existence and the cosmos? Have you had any paranormal or unexplainable experiences you'd be willing to share? Thank you and all blessings upon you. So just a small one to start. What's your view of the cosmos?
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, dear.
Existential crisis incoming.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Hell's teeth, I don't really know. What I hope is we carry on in some fashion, and I would hope consciously in some fashion, but perhaps we become part of some larger element. I've done a few stories that basically speculate about the afterlife. I mean, the trilogy does, of course. The Lonely Lands does. Mm-hmm. But do I believe any of that? I don't know. I just hope to carry on in some form. That's as much as I could say in terms of what we. But I mean, I think we're also, if you like, elements of the tendency of the cosmos to form patterns. But we're a conscious element, I think. Paranormal. Oh yeah. I'm sitting with my back to the haunted room, basically. Not nice. The one I work in, but the one directly next door, the top guest room in our house. I'll tell you only one anecdote, but there have been lots of things in there. I mean, coins sometimes appear on the floor, just ordinary old, just straightforward pennies. In one case, I actually saw one drop in the middle of the carpet from nowhere. So that kind of impressed me. And we felt for a very long time that well, in fact, I'll tell you the anecdote that gave rise to this. Shortly after we'd moved into the house, this was 40 years ago or more. Actually, it was pretty well exactly 40 years ago. We were burgled, and we'd gone out for the day, came back, found the back window on the ground floor had been jimmied somehow, and all of Jenny's jewellery had been stolen from our bedroom, which is on the middle floor of the three-story house, including all the stuff that sentimental value and that kind of a thing. So we went through the house in increasing dismay, and I discovered, not greatly to my dismay, that my CD player had been pinched from this workroom. Well, obviously, the insurance is going to cover a CD player, as indeed it did. But we went into this other room, and at this stage, we didn't really have any sense of anything there. And we discovered a bag with all of Jenny's jewellery in it.
Wow.
Had been abandoned.
Ooh.
So they clearly panicked. Now, if you're on the top of the house, third floor, and you've got the bag of swag, you might run if you heard a noise or something. But you drop your loot, you'd take it with you. But something had terrified them so much, apparently, they'd left what they'd stolen, apart from presumably somebody with a CD player under his arm, which is, by the way. But the fact is, they left all the really valuable stuff, even though they'd bagged it up in that room, and sort of persuaded us. But yes, there have been many other things. People who've stayed in the room have had strange feelings in the night, and I mean, Jenny, whenever we go away on holiday or, for a weekend, Jenny always says, well, look after the house for us. We did get an alarm put in, but maybe we don't really need it. Maybe we've got something better than an alarm. And I do remember one time, this was quite a few years ago now, and it was the height of summer. We were going off to Turkey or Greece or something, for a holiday. And I wasn't wearing very much. I was going to get dressed, in a bit. And, so I went into the room, just checking around the house, see all the windows were shut and all that stuff. And as I came out of the room, something touched me on the shoulder. Oh. And I would describe this thing like a child's hand, but made out of cobwebs. That's what it felt like. It didn't seem particularly menacing. So I said, okay, look after the place for us. And that was that.
Got your own spectral security guard.
But you might want to look behind me now.
Yeah. Checking the corners. Yeah.
That figure just going across. That's almost like, those old Amicus films where they go in and they steal something from the antique shop.
Mhm.
But it sounds like that person heeded the warning. They obviously got a warning and left it there.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Or Treasure of Abbott Thomas or something like that, you know.
Yes.
Warning to the curious, no digging here. Yep. Next up, we have a message from Dominic Allen. Dominic writes, having not read any of your work and yet seeing such a large amount of stories, novels, and collections, where would you suggest a newcomer to start? Or what work are you most proud of? That should hopefully give me a jumping off point.
Oh, Lord. Well, I am on the whole, very happy with the trilogy. You know, I think it does a lot of what I want my books to do. And it does have a lot of range. I mean, again, the point was, Pete Crowther, good old Pete Crowther at PS Publishing, he'd been kind of gently chivying me to do a trilogy, supernatural trilogy. And it was, as with the novella, I don't want to write a trilogy unless there's a reason to write a trilogy, not just a long book that's been chopped in 3 bits. And eventually I did think of this idea of, following the characters across, most of their lives, starting in adolescence and then into, adulthood, and then eventually into whatever you want to call it, old age, presumably. But, equally the antagonists are developing along those similar lines. And also the antagonists are becoming more numerous as their family grows. But it also, I think, does have a fair amount, I hope, of cosmic terror in it.
Oh, yes.
I'm kind of fond of that book, of those books, I say. But of course, that's a bit self-serving of me because I'm saying to this Dominic saying, buy 3 books, not just one. If you want just one, a novel, I think maybe Fellstones is a pretty good springboard, I'm again, cosmic horror. I'm assuming, you're into that or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. So let's say Fellstones is the other possibility. Or if you want short stories, well, I do think that the PS retrospective books, there's the 2 phantasmagorical stories books. There's the companion and others, and there's the retrospective and others. And that's got pretty well my entire career, the best of, really. Or, alternatively, if you want my Lovecraftian short stories, there's 2 volumes of those from PS Publishing again. So, no, you asked for one and you got 6, so there you go.
Basically, Dominic, if it's got Ramsey Campbell on the cover, then get it. So perhaps we could just finish up by speaking about August Derleth, because it's something we both know and we come up against a fair bit. He still seems to get a hard time for some people. And yet, as we constantly say, I think, no August Derleth, no, none of us, really. I wonder if you could speak something about how you first met him and how he helped you and guided you and what you think his contribution has been.
Oh, sure. Well, sadly, I never actually met him, would that I had, but I didn't go to Arkham House till 75, by which time, he'd been gone for several years, alas. But how we got together, well, I'd written a few of these Lovecraft pastiches that were eventually to appear in The Inhabitants of the Lake, or the rewritten versions were. A friend, a correspondent, Pat Kearney, who was now a historian of erotic fiction and literature, among other things. He did a book about the Olympia Press, for instance. He was then publishing a fanzine called Gaudi. And, having learned that I'd written these stories, he asked if he could see them. And I duly sent them off to him, second-class Royal Mail, the only copy handwritten. So if that had got lost, we wouldn't be talking now. But it duly didn't. And he asked whether he could publish one, which he did in his fanzine. And at the same time, he and one of his readers, Betty Kujawa, who was an American fan and again, the enthusiast in our field, they suggested, I should just ask Derleth, as being, the authority on Lovecraft, what he thought of the story. So I duly sent him an air letter saying, "Dear Mr. Derleth, you are, the world's, words to the effect of," and all our correspondence is actually published by PS, actually, in a book. called Letters to Arkham. Anyway, the first one by Dealer to Death, would you be able to give me your opinion on, are these stories any good? And he wrote back saying, well, we hold the copyright on the Lovecraft concept, so we need to look at these before you attempt to publish them. Well, that's arguable, but there you are. So I do, anyway, typed them up, sent them off. Eventually got a letter back from him saying, these stories, basically, they need a lot of work. They need to be fleshed out, need to use dialogue, you need to tone the overwriting down and various other stuff like this. But, if you're prepared to do all this work and, if you're capable of writing more stories in a similar vein, I do think we might have a potential Arkham House book.
Wow.
50 years old, that's pretty strong stuff, So, when I sort of picked myself up, and also when I stopped, muttering about being edited as well, half an hour later, I began to think, well, yeah, he does have a point. And so I duly rewrote the stories. He initially published The Church in High Street when I was 16 in an anthology, Dark Mind, Dark Heart. He did edit that when he said in advance, he would want to edit it. And so I duly said, okay. But he didn't edit The Inhabitant. I think he changed about 6 or deleted about 6 words or a couple of moderate vulgarities in there, which didn't really fit, I agree. But otherwise, he published it as written. And so that was where it started. I also think this, I think that it was a classic case of being exactly the right place, exactly the right time, because he later told me in his correspondence that he was becoming, kind of exhausted in terms of writing Lovecraft pastiches. He felt he hadn't got much to offer. And so I think, here kind of came along this writer who was doing Lovecraft pastiches which he thought were publishable. And, he felt I could sort of pick up the beacon a little bit and, keep Lovecraft in, but by doing this, keep Lovecraft's tradition, reputation alive. And I think that was I imagine, partly what was at the back of his mind. In terms of, his importance, well, Arkham House, for heaven's sake, without the Outsider and others, I don't know that we would never have heard of Lovecraft. I don't think that's likely. I think, anthologists would have picked up his work, but whether he would have, whether he would have ascended as quickly as he did into the public consciousness without August, that I think may very well not have been the case. So full marks to August, and also, not just for Lovecraft, but for Arkham House, which was, just an ordinary publisher, not least of first books by people who would later go on to do much more. So, you got Bob Bloch, you got Bradbury, you got Fritz Leiber, you even got me, but, you can do without that.
I wonder if there's a sense as well of it's taking the Lovecraft feel and putting it somewhere else, because famously you've said about, like everyone does, their first story is set in Arkham or wherever. And then so it helps the mythos, for want of a better word, which I know is a very loose, nebulous thing. Yeah. But it helps to bring it out of just that one setting. It refreshes it.
Oh, yes. And that was August's idea. He said, you've got to move it away from Lovecraft country and invent your own. And I duly did, which was probably just as unlike the real thing. But he wasn't to know that, being American.
Yeah, because I've actually got the letter here, because it was reprinted in the back of the Inhabitant of the Lake, the drugstore Indian version.
Indeed.
Yeah, a letter 6th of October 1961. Yeah. So what I suggest you do is establish a setting in a coastal area of England and create your own British milieu. This would not appreciably change your stories, but it would give them a much-needed new setting and would not, in the reader's mind, invite a direct comparison with Lovecraft, for in such a comparison, they would not show up as well as if you had your own setting and place name for the tales. Very wise words. Yeah.
Good advice. I think you bet, yes.
I have one last question, a burning question.
Oh.
So, when is Spanked by Nuns coming out?
Sadly, never. I attempted to persuade various publishers on it, but nothing was forthcoming. And what then happened was, Nikki Flynn wrote her autobiographical memoir, Dances with Werewolves, and I wrote the introduction for that. I mean, in those days, Adam Neville was, as he liked to say, the Virgin erotica editor, which what a tag is that, by God. So I did the introduction to her book, and I really felt, she dealt with what I was going to deal with, but, far more cogently and from far more experience, let me say. Now, I did salvage one story or one kind of thread of the novel, and I wrote it as a short story called Safe Words, which is in one of my PS collections. And now, to be honest with you, I've forgotten which one. But that was the sort of thing that would have been in that novel, had it come to fruition. But who knows? Now you've prompted me. Maybe I'll think of doing it again. You never know.
Well, on that note,
on that bombshell,
I hear the big yellow bus is pulling up outside, so it's time for us to vacate Innsmouth, except, of course, for Ramsey, who gets to enjoy the luxurious Gilman suite. Have you looked in the minibar yet? I'm not sure what delights they've got in there.
Absinthe, I hope.
So a huge thanks to Ramsey for joining us today. And I think I echo what A.T. Johnson says there. Thanks so much for all your work over the years. An amazing body of work that is continuing to expand. It's nice to see.
As am I.
So, yes, 100 shows, folks. We'd just like to say a big thank you to all the guests we've had on over the past 100 episodes, to everyone who's contributed to the podcast in one way or another, to our YouTube subscribers, and of course to our wonderful patrons who help us to keep the show going. So we'd like to say a big thank you to Steve Grant, Fred Kisher, Gareth Tilley, Catherine Hargrave, Stuart Price, Alan Brignall, Mitch Keith, Lee Williams, Ekaterina Sureva, Niels Hedgelin, Liam Spinarge, Martin Thoresen, Dominic Allen, Ulrich de Vetter, Mark Jenkins, David A. Riley, A.T. Johnson, Gary Pennington, Brett Kramer, Steve Meyer, Wingate Stites, Justin Woodman, Lee Clark Zumper,
Stephen Vincent, Oblivion Media, Barbara Reed, Sanjay Matthew, David Gurney, Rob Weaver, Benjamin Slade, Aaron Vleck, Lane Mullin, Russell Journey, Nick Lorimer, Rick Seam, Sharon Sophia, and Chris Carr. Thank you all.
Yes, thanks very much, folks. And a huge thanks again to Ramsey.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me.
And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.